The sky doesn't care how many lives are inside a metal tube. At 37,000 feet, it is cold, thin, and unforgiving. On that night, 183 people trusted the hum of engines and the calm voice from the cockpit, believing the hardest part of their journey was already behind them. Coffee had gone cold on tray tables. Seatbelt signs were still on, but no one complained. It felt like any other flight, and that's what made what came next so terrifying. Somewhere far away, in a dark control room lit by green radar screens, a small symbol blinked in and out. It wasn't supposed to. The aircraft's track wavered, then steadied, then dipped again. Air traffic controllers leaned closer, their confidence slipping as the data refused to behave. At first they told themselves it was a glitch. Systems hiccup all the time. But then the altitude began to fall, slowly at first, like a breath being held too long. Inside the cockpit, the captain felt it before he saw it. A subtle change in pressure, a vibration that didn't belong. He glanced at his first officer, who was already looking back, eyes sharp and questioning. Instruments still glowed, but the numbers didn't agree with each other anymore. The plane was flying, but not the way it should. Not the way it had 1,000 times before. In the cabin, a woman in seat 24 tightened her grip on the armrest. She didn't know why. She just felt wrong. Across the aisle, a man traveling for work stared at his phone, refreshing a message he hadn't sent yet. Up front, a flight attendant paused mid-step, listening to a sound only she seemed to notice. It was faint, almost hidden by the engines, but it was enough to make her heart speed up. Then the first warning sounded. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a soft chime and a light that wasn't supposed to be on. The captain reached for the radio. His voice stayed calm because that's what pilots are trained to do. Calm keeps fear from spreading. Calm keeps people alive. He reported an issue. Nothing more, nothing less. But even as he spoke, he knew this wasn't routine. Something deeper was wrong. Something that checklists alone might not fix. Miles away, high above a different stretch of sky, two F-22 Raptors cut through the darkness. Sleek, fast, and silent. They flew in loose formation. Guardians of airspace most people never think about. The pilots inside them were used to tension. They lived in it. Training drills, intercepts, long hours of waiting broken by moments of pure focus. Tonight was supposed to be quiet, uneventful. The kind of shift that ends with coffee and jokes back on the ground. One of those pilots carried a call sign that still echoed through briefing rooms and flight lines. Ghost Rider. It was a name earned years earlier, tied to skill, nerve, and a mission that had gone terribly wrong. Official reports said Ghost Rider had been lost in 2019, declared dead after a chain of events no one liked to talk about. A ghost in Naaman, for most in memory. But the voice inside that helmet was very much alive. As the F-22s cruised, a priority alert crackled through their headsets. Not the usual chatter. This was different, urgent, confused. Air traffic control relayed fragmented information about a civilian aircraft in trouble. Its systems behaving unpredictably, its descent rate increasing without explanation. There was no mayday yet, but everyone listening felt it coming. Ghost Rider's hands tightened on the controls. He'd heard this tone before. The kind that tells you lives are balancing on a thin edge. The kind that doesn't let you look away. He exchanged a glance with his wingman through the canopy, a silent question passing between them. Orders were still forming, nothing official had been given, but instinct was already moving faster than protocol. Back on the passenger plane, the second warning came. Louder this time. The first officer read off data that made no sense. The aircraft was losing something critical, and it wasn't obvious what. Redundancies that should have protected them were failing one by one, like dominoes falling in the dark. The captain thought about the people behind him, about the number that mattered most right now. 183 souls. He made the call. His voice stayed steady, but the word cut through the air like a blade. Mayday. That single word changed everything. Controllers snapped into motion. Radios lit up. Procedures kicked in. The aircraft's path was cleared, but options were limited. Weather closed off one direction. Terrain rose sharply in another. The nearest suitable runway was far, maybe too far, given what the instruments were now showing. Time, which always feels endless at altitude, suddenly felt very short. In the cabin, the mood shifted. People felt it, even if they didn't understand it. Flight attendants moved with purpose, their smiles practiced but thin. A child asked a question that went unanswered. A man whispered a prayer. Someone laughed nervously, as if humor could push back fear. The plane shuddered, just once, but it was enough. High above, Ghost Rider listened as the situation unfolded over the radio. The call sign of the civilian aircraft, the altitude, the heading, the rate of descent. His mind worked through possibilities faster than words could keep up. He knew these skies. He knew what lay ahead of that flight path, and he didn't like it. Then something happened that made the entire channel go quiet for half a second. A controller, stressed and speaking too fast, referenced an old contingency plan, one that involved military assistance if civilian guidance failed. The plan included a name, spoken almost without thought, pulled from a database that hadn't been cleaned up in years. Ghost Rider, the controller said, correcting himself immediately. Negative, disregard. Ghost Rider was declared dead. The words hung there, heavy and wrong. Inside the F-22, the pilot didn't hesitate. He pressed the transmit button. "Control, Ghost Rider is airborne," he said. Simple, clear, alive. For a heartbeat, no one responded. On the troubled passenger jet, the captain fought the controls as the aircraft dipped again. He could feel the plane arguing with him, resisting inputs that should have worked. Sweat ran down his back despite the cold. He thought of training, of simulators, of scenarios that always ended with a reset button. There was no reset here. In the cabin, a woman reached for her husband's hand. A teenager stared out the window, watching the stars slide in strange angles. A flight attendant knelt beside an elderly man, speaking softly, telling him everything would be okay even as the plane trembled beneath them. Back in the airspace above, the F-22s received new instructions, vectors, altitudes, a request that blurred the line between escort and rescue. Ghost Rider acknowledged, his voice calm, his heart pounding. He pushed the throttles forward, the jet responding instantly, surging ahead with controlled power. Below him, somewhere in the darkness, 183 people were running out of options. As the distance closed, radar symbols converged, and every second began to matter more than the last. The civilian aircraft was still airborne, still fighting, but the margin was shrinking. Controllers whispered calculations under their breath. Pilots checked instruments again and again, hoping for a miracle in the numbers. Ghost Rider angled his jet eyes, searching the void ahead, knowing that whatever came next would test everything he thought he'd left behind in 2019. And as the troubled plane's nose dipped once more, the question no one dared to ask pressed in on all of them at the same time. Could a pilot declared dead be the only one who could save them now? Ghost Rider didn't think about the word dead as his jet cut through the night. He had heard it before, whispered in hangars, buried in reports, spoken by people who thought the story was finished. For him, it was just noise. What mattered now was the blinking radar return ahead and below him, the fragile aircraft fighting gravity with less strength every minute. Years earlier, in 2019, his life had split cleanly in two, before and after. Before, he was a rising star, trusted with difficult missions, respected for his calm under pressure. After he became a name people avoided. The mission that supposedly killed him was still classified in parts, but the rumors were enough. A jet lost over hostile airspace, a transponder gone silent, a recovery attempt that found nothing. For the public, the story ended there. For Ghost Rider, it never really did. He had survived. But survival came with conditions. Silence, disappearance, a new identity layered over the old one, like fresh paint that never fully covered the cracks. He still flew, still trained, still served, but always in the shadows. Officially, Ghost Rider was gone. Unofficially, he was called when things became too strange, too sensitive, or too dangerous to fail. Now, as the distance closed, the past pressed in on him. The sound of his own breathing inside the helmet felt louder than usual. He checked his instruments, then checked them again. Everything was perfect. His jet was flawless. The problem lay ahead, in a civilian aircraft never designed for this kind of fight. In the control room, confusion mixed with urgency. Some controllers had frozen for a second when Ghost Rider's voice came through. Others ignored the name entirely and focused on the data. Procedures were being bent, not broken, but only just. Every instruction was weighed carefully. Too much guidance could overwhelm the struggling crew. Too little could doom them. The civilian captain listened as new voices entered the conversation. Military tones, short, precise phrases. He didn't know who Ghost Rider was. Not really. To him, it was just another pilot on the frequency. But there was something steady about that voice. Something that cut through the chaos. It reminded him of instructors from long ago. The ones who could calm a room just by speaking. Captain Ghost Rider said, "Careful to keep it simple. I'm above and behind you. I have visual conditions. I'm going to stay with you." Those words mattered more than any technical advice. "You're not alone." The captain nodded even though no one could see him. The first officer glanced over, eyes tired but focused. They had been carrying this weight by themselves. Now, someone else was sharing it. In the cabin, the flight attendants had shifted into a different mode. Training took over. They secured loose items, spoke quietly but firmly, and moved with purpose. Passengers noticed the change. The calm routines were gone, replaced by something more serious. A man asked if everything was okay. A flight attendant smiled and said they were handling a situation, nothing more. A young woman near the window felt the plane bank slightly, more than before. Her stomach tightened. She thought about the text she hadn't sent, the call she meant to make when she landed. She didn't panic. Not yet. But the thought settled in her chest and refused to leave. Back in the air, Ghost Rider matched the civilian jet's speed and heading, keeping a respectful distance. He could see the navigation lights flickering against the darkness, a fragile glow in an empty sky. He studied the aircraft's movements, the way it responded to control inputs, the subtle wobbles that spoke volumes to a trained eye. Something wasn't adding up. This wasn't a simple mechanical failure. The pattern was wrong. Systems that should fail together were dropping out one by one, backup after backup, behaving unpredictably. It felt less like a single problem and more like a cascade. Triggered by something hidden, he asked careful questions, never overwhelming the crew. Readings, feelings, sounds, smells, anything out of the ordinary. The captain answered when he could, his voice steady but strained. The first officer added details, pointing out anomalies that didn't fit any checklist they knew. In the control room, an engineer leaned over a console, scrolling through technical data. He frowned, then called a supervisor. This failure mode wasn't familiar. It wasn't in the quick reference guides. It reminded him of a test scenario he'd read about years ago, one that was supposed to be nearly impossible outside a lab. Could it be interference? Someone asked quietly. The room went still. Interference was a word no one liked to use lightly. It opened doors to questions no one wanted to answer on an open channel. Natural causes were easier. Mechanical faults were manageable. Interference suggested intent, or at least complexity far beyond routine operations. Ghost Rider heard the hesitation in the voices below. He didn't comment on it. He'd seen enough in his career to know that not everything broken looks broken from the outside. Sometimes the fight is invisible. As the minutes passed, the aircraft's altitude continued to drop, slowly but steadily. Fuel was still good. Weather remained marginal but flyable. The runway options were narrowing. Every calculation came with an asterisk. Every plan with a warning attached. The captain's hands ached from gripping the controls. He rotated through trim adjustments, coaxing the plane rather than forcing it. Years of experience told him that aggression would only make things worse. He spoke to his first officer, not just about numbers, but about trust. About staying ahead of the aircraft instead of chasing it. In the cabin, a child began to cry. The sound rippled through the rows, breaking the uneasy quiet. A mother held him close, whispering reassurances she half believed herself. An older man closed his eyes, breathing slowly, counting each inhale like he'd learned long ago. Ghost Rider listened to all of it, through filtered snippets. The human side bleeding through the technical chatter. This was why he still flew. Not for the speed or the machine, but for moments like this. When presence alone could change the shape of fear. His wingman stayed silent, monitoring from a wider arc, ready to assist but careful not to crowd the airspace. Fuel states were checked. Time was measured not in minutes now, but in options. Then another warning tone echoed through the civilian cockpit. Different from the others, more insistent. The first officer read it out, then stopped. "That doesn't make sense," he said quietly. Ghost Rider felt a chill despite the controlled environment of his cockpit. He'd heard that phrase before, usually just before things went very wrong. He asked them to repeat the reading. The numbers were wrong again, conflicting with everything else. In the control room, someone pulled up archived data, searching for anything similar. Old incidents, near misses simulations. One file caught their attention, buried deep and rarely accessed. It was marked with a year, 2019, the same year Ghost Rider was declared dead. No one said it out loud, but the connection hung there, unspoken and unsettling. Coincidence was possible, but in aviation, patterns matter, even uncomfortable ones. Ghost Rider adjusted his position slightly, watching the aircraft's response. The lights flickered again, just for a moment. He keyed the mic, choosing his words carefully. "Captain, whatever happens next, we take it one step at a time. Don't rush the airplane." The captain exhaled slowly. "Copy that," he said. "One step at a time." Below them, the runway lights were still far away, a faint promise on the horizon. Between here and there lay uncertainty, unanswered questions, and a mystery that refused to stay buried. And as the aircraft shuddered once more, not enough to break it, but enough to remind everyone how close the edge really was, Ghost Rider realized this mission wasn't just about saving a plane. It was about confronting a past that had never truly let him go. The closer they got, the heavier the air seemed to feel, even inside pressurized cabins and sealed helmets. Time stretched in strange ways. Seconds felt too short, while each minute carried the weight of a decision that could not be taken back. The runway was still a distant line of light, and between it and the failing aircraft lay a sky that offered no mercy for mistakes. Ghost Rider stayed just off the civilian jet's left side, close enough to see its movements clearly, far enough to avoid disturbing its already unstable flight. From his angle, the aircraft looked tired, like it was fighting a strong current that no one else could see. Small corrections led to delayed reactions. The nose dipped, recovered, then dipped again. Not dramatic enough to panic, but enough to signal that something was deeply wrong. Inside the cockpit, the captain's focus narrowed to the essentials. Speed, altitude, attitude, everything else became background noise. He had stopped thinking in terms of landing safely and started thinking in terms of staying airborne long enough to have a choice. His first officer noticed the shift and adjusted, taking on more of the communication, filtering information so the captain could keep flying. The radio crackled with overlapping voices. Controllers debated headings and descent profiles. Engineers suggested checks that were already being attempted. No one wanted to say the obvious, that they were running out of room to experiment. Each suggestion carried risk, and risk was something they could no longer afford casually. In the cabin, tension crept from row to row like a quiet tide. Passengers exchanged glances, reading each other's faces for clues. A man in a business suit finally powered down his phone, slipping it into his pocket, as if accepting that no more messages were coming. A young couple held hands, neither speaking, their thoughts loud enough without words. A flight attendant crouched near the rear galley, steadying herself as the plane trembled again. She had been flying for years, had seen turbulence, diversions, even medical emergencies. This felt different. This felt like the aircraft itself was unsure of what it wanted to do next. Ghost Rider listened to the cockpit crew describe another anomaly, a system that briefly came back online, then dropped out again. It was as if something were interfering with the plane's ability to agree with itself. He thought about that file from 2019, the one no one liked to discuss. He had been on the other side of a similar problem back then, watching his own instruments lie to him. He didn't mention it, not yet. Some ideas are too heavy to drop without proof. In the control room, a senior controller made a decision that raised a few eyebrows. He limited the number of voices on the main frequency. Too much information could overwhelm the crew, and panic was as dangerous as any technical failure. He assigned one person to speak, one to listen, and one to think ahead. Off to the side, a supervisor quietly placed a call to a secure line. The conversation was brief, coded, and tense. When he hung up, his expression had changed. The situation was bigger than a single flight now, even if the passengers didn't know it. Back in the sky, Ghost Rider adjusted his fuel calculations. He had time, but not unlimited time. His jet could stay with the aircraft for a while, but every extra minute burned options elsewhere. Get whether to push closer, to offer more direct guidance, or to stay as he was. A steady presence rather than an intrusive one. The civilian captain asked a question that cut through everything. If we lose this system completely, he said, what do you see from your side? Ghost Rider paused. He chose honesty without fear. I see an aircraft that still wants to fly, he said, but it's being told the wrong things. That answer didn't solve anything, but it gave shape to the problem. The enemy wasn't gravity. It wasn't weather. It was information, or the lack of it. In the cabin, a teenager pressed his forehead to the window, watching the other jet for the first time. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it was impossible to miss. A sharp, angular shadow moving alongside them, close enough to feel protective, distant enough to feel unreal. He wondered why it was there, and whether that was a good sign or a bad one. A flight attendant noticed him staring and followed his gaze. Her breath caught for a moment. She hadn't been told about an escort. No one had. She straightened up and smiled at the teenager, but her eyes lingered on the shape outside longer than she meant to. In the control room, data streams continued to pour in. One analyst flagged a pattern in the signal dropouts, something rhythmic, almost deliberate. He hesitated before speaking. Accusations had consequences, but patterns also had meaning. Could be environmental, he said carefully, but it's behaving. Selectively, the word settled uneasily among the group. Ghost Rider felt the aircraft shudder again. Stronger this time, the captain corrected, but the delay was longer. The plane responded like it was thinking before moving, and thinking took time they didn't have. He leaned forward slightly, as if that alone could help. Memories pressed in, despite his efforts to keep them out. The sound of alarms in 2019, the way his own jet had fought him, the moment he realized the problem wasn't mechanical, but something else entirely. He pushed the thought aside. This was not the same situation. It couldn't be, or maybe that was just what he wanted to believe. The runway lights grew brighter, but the angle was wrong. Too high, too fast, or maybe too slow. The numbers refused to settle. Controllers recalculated, then recalculated again. There was talk of a go-round, then silence as everyone realized how risky that might be. In the cabin, the seatbelt sign chimed again. This time, it wasn't just a reminder, it was a warning. People obeyed without complaint. Fear had become a shared language. A man near the aisle whispered, "Are we going to make it?" To no one in particular. No one answered, but a woman across from him reached out and touched his arm. A small human gesture, in a situation too big for words. Ghost Rider keyed the mic once more. "Captain," he said, "if you're comfortable, I can talk you through what I'm seeing. Not procedures, just perspective." The captain considered it, hands steady despite the strain. "Do it," he said. Ghost Rider began to describe the aircraft's movement in simple terms. Nose, attitude, wing response. Subtle yaw that the instruments might not be capturing correctly. He spoke slowly, calmly, like a coach rather than a commander. As he talked, something unexpected happened. The plane's motion smoothed, just a little, not fixed, not safe, but less chaotic. The captain adjusted his inputs based on what he heard rather than what he saw on the screens. In the control room, someone noticed the change. "They're stabilizing," a voice said, cautious but hopeful. But hope was fragile, because at that same moment, another alert appeared on a secondary display. A system no one had been watching closely enough had just dropped offline, and no one could say what that would mean next. The new alert didn't scream. It didn't flash red the way disasters usually do in training videos. It appeared quietly, almost politely, like a door closing somewhere far away. But everyone who noticed it understood what it meant. Another layer of protection was gone. and the margin they were working with had just narrowed again. In the cockpit, the first officer stared at the display for a second too long. "That shouldn't be off," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The captain didn't answer right away. He felt it through the controls. A slight change in resistance, like the aircraft had lost another anchor point. He compensated instinctively, years of muscle memory guiding his hands. Ghost Rider saw the change almost at the same time. The aircraft's profile shifted, subtle but unmistakable. He adjusted his position, staying aligned, his eyes never leaving the job. This was the phase where things often unraveled, not with a bang, but with a series of small losses that added up faster than anyone could manage. In the control room, voices dropped to near whispers. Instructions were shorter now, stripped of anything unnecessary. Someone counted down distances to the runway under their breath. Another person watched the weather feed, hoping it would stay stable for just a few more minutes. The runway lights were no longer a distant promise. They were real now, stretching across the darkness, close enough for everyone to imagine the wheels touching down. But close also meant there was no more room to delay. Whatever was going to happen would happen soon. In the cabin, the plane shuddered again, harder than before. A few gasps escaped before people caught themselves. The flight attendants moved quickly, checking seatbelts, locking eyes with passengers, offering silent reassurance. One of them felt her hands shake as she gripped a seat back, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, the way she'd been taught. A child asked if they were landing early. His mother nodded, unable to speak. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering words he might remember for the rest of his life. Or maybe forget entirely if things went the way everyone hoped. Ghost Rider listened as the captain reported the latest readings. The numbers were unstable, fluctuating just enough to undermine confidence. He thought again of 2019, of how quickly a situation could tip from manageable to impossible. He pushed the thought away, focusing on what he could control. "Captain," he said, "you're still flying the aircraft. Don't let the alerts fly it for you." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The captain nodded again, jaw clenched, eyes scanning outside more than inside now. He trusted the feel of the plane more than the screens. The first officer adjusted his own focus, backing up every move, every call-out. In the control room, a supervisor made a call that would be questioned later, no matter how this ended. He authorized a deviation from standard approach guidance, giving the captain more freedom to manage the descent. It was a risk, but a calculated one. At this point, rigid procedures could do more harm than good. The aircraft descended through another layer of air, and the turbulence changed character. It wasn't violent, but it was uneven, like driving on a road that suddenly lost its markings. The wings flexed, the engines adjusted. Every sound felt louder, sharper. Passengers sensed the proximity to the ground, even if they couldn't see it. The darkness outside the windows felt heavier, closer. A man closed his eyes and counted backward from 100. A woman held a necklace between her fingers, rubbing it smooth with each breath. Ghost Rider's wingman broke his silence for the first time in a while. "Fuel state in 10, he said calmly. A reminder that their presence also had limits. Ghost Rider acknowledged, his mind already working through the implications. He couldn't stay forever. Whatever support he was giving had to count now, not later. The civilian captain called out a speed that made the control room tense. It was on the edge of what they wanted. Not wrong, but unforgiving. Too slow and control would suffer. Too fast and stopping on the runway would be a problem. There was no perfect number anymore, just the least dangerous one. Another alert chimed, then vanished. "No one liked that either. Do you still have visual?" Ghost Rider asked. "Barely," the captain replied. "Lights are there, but they're shifting." Ghost Rider watched closely. From his vantage point, the runway alignment looked slightly off, a trick of perspective caused by the aircraft's attitude. He described it carefully, talking the captain through what he was seeing, frame by frame. This wasn't something you learned from a manual. It was passed from pilot to pilot, experience to experience. In the control room, someone noticed a spike in a background signal, brief but distinct. It correlated with one of the earlier system dropouts. The analyst's stomach tightened. He flagged it again, louder this time. "There's something interacting with their systems," he said. "I can't say what, but it's not random." No one replied. The implications were too heavy to unpack right now. The aircraft descended through the final approach path. The ground was close enough now to feel like a presence, waiting. The captain adjusted power, then adjusted again. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he didn't blink. In the cabin, the engines changed pitch, a sound everyone recognized from landings past. Normally, it brought relief. Tonight, it only sharpened the tension. People leaned forward in their seats, bracing without realizing it. Ghost Rider's breathing slowed, his voice steady as he continued to guide. He thought about the name he carried, about being declared dead, about how strange it was to be here now, invisible yet essential. He wondered if anyone down there would ever know how close this moment was to going the other way. The runway filled the windshield of the civilian jet. There was no more sky to buy time, no more altitude to trade for options. Then, without warning, the aircraft lurched, not violently, but enough to throw off the careful balance. they'd been holding. The captain reacted instantly, correcting, but the response lagged just enough to make everyone's heart stop. Ghost Rider tensed, ready to speak, ready to act, knowing that whatever happened next would decide everything. And as the plane dipped toward the lights below, the question that had haunted the night rose to the surface. Louder than any alarm, would Control return in time? Or had they already crossed the point where only hope was left? For a fraction of a second, everything felt weightless. Not the smooth kind of weightlessness pilots train for, but the wrong kind, the kind that tells you the aircraft is no longer fully agreeing with the laws it's supposed to obey. The nose dipped, the horizon tilted, and the carefully balanced approach began to unravel. Correcting, the captain said, his voice tight but controlled. He pulled gently, then, a little more, waiting for the response. It came late, and when it did, it came unevenly. The aircraft rolled just a touch to the left, enough to pull them off the center line they'd fought so hard to line up. Ghost Rider saw it instantly. From his angle, the misalignment was obvious. Dangerous at this altitude. He moved closer without thinking, breaking his own comfort margin. The jetliner's wing lights flashed in his canopy, close enough now to see individual panels. The strain in their flex, Captain. You're drifting left, he said. Don't chase it. Let it settle. But before the captain could answer, another tone sounded in the cockpit. Different again. Short, sharp. The first officer froze, eyes locked on a new message that hadn't been there seconds earlier. That system just came back, he said, but it's feeding conflicting data. Conflicting data at this point was worse than no data at all. In the control room, alarms didn't go off, but something else happened that made the air feel heavier. A secondary radar feed flickered, then stabilized on a slightly different position than the primary. Two aircraft tracks appeared where there should have been one. Close together, too close. Is that a ghost? Someone asked quietly. The word wasn't meant to be poetic. It was a technical term. A false return, a phantom track, usually harmless, usually filtered out automatically, usually. Ghost Rider felt a familiar chill crawl up his spine. He'd seen this before. In 2019, right before everything went wrong. Back then, the system had insisted there was something in the sky that wasn't really there. Or worse, insisted there wasn't something that was. Control, he said carefully. What are you seeing on your scope right now? There was a pause, just long enough to matter. Verifying, the controller replied. That was not the answer Ghost Rider wanted to hear. Inside the passenger cabin, the plane shook harder than before. A few passengers cried out before catching themselves. The flight attendants braced, spreading their stance, one hand gripping seat packs, the other instinctively reaching toward passengers who needed reassurance. A man shouted a question no one could answer. A woman whispered a prayer out loud. The child who had asked about landing early buried his face in his mother's chest. In the cockpit, the captain felt the controls push back against him in a way they hadn't before. Not resistance. Exactly. More like disagreement. He tried to override, but the aircraft hesitated, then responded in a way that didn't fully match his input. It's fighting me, he said. Ghost Rider's jaw tightened. This was no longer just a failing system. Something was actively interfering with the relationship between pilot and plane. In the control room, the analyst who'd flagged the signal earlier spoke up again, louder now. The interference spike just increased, he said. And it's moving. Moving where? The supervisor asked. Along their flight path. Silence fell like a curtain. The implications were terrifying. Whatever this was, it wasn't static. It wasn't a fixed environmental anomaly. It was tracking the aircraft, staying with it, adapting. Ghost Rider adjusted his jet again, moving slightly ahead now, trying to give the captain a clearer visual reference. But even as he did, his own systems flickered for a heartbeat, just a blink. So brief he might have missed it if he hadn't been looking for it. He exhaled slowly. Control, he said, keeping his voice steady. I'm seeing minor fluctuations on my end as well. That sentence changed the situation completely. If a fifth-generation fighter was being affected, even slightly, then this wasn't a localized civilian issue. This was something bigger, something no one had planned for on a quiet night. In the control room, the supervisor's hand hovered over a switch he hadn't touched in years. Protocols written for scenarios that were never supposed to happen outside simulations. He didn't flip it yet, not until he was sure. The runway rushed closer, lights stretching and bending in the windshield of the civilian jet. The captain fought to hold alignment, trusting his senses over the instruments now, trusting the voice beside him and the one in his headset. Ghost Rider spoke again. Slower this time. Captain, ignore the last data update. Fly what you feel. I'll keep you straight. The captain nodded, even as another warning blinked and vanished. His world narrowed to the runway, the yoke, and the sound of his own breathing behind them, unseen by passengers and barely understood by those tracking it. The ghost signal strengthened. Whatever had followed them this far was not done yet, and as the aircraft crossed the final threshold of the approach, with no altitude left to bargain and no time left to question what was real, one terrifying thought settled in every trained mind. Involved in the fight, this might not be an accident at all. The aircraft crossed the approach lights with barely any margin left. The runway filled the windshield, no longer a destination, but an immediate demand. The captain's hands were steady now, not because the situation had improved, but because there was nothing left to debate. This was the moment training was built for, stripped of theory and comfort. "Hold it," Ghost Rider said quietly. Not a command. A reminder. The captain did exactly that. He stopped chasing numbers, stopped reacting to flickering alerts, and flew the airplane the way he'd learned decades earlier, by feel and trust. The first officer backed him up without hesitation, calling out what mattered and ignoring what didn't. Together, they formed a single rhythm, man and machine trying to agree one last time. In the control room, every voice went silent. No one wanted to interrupt what was unfolding. Radar tracks merged again, the Ghost returned flickering, as if unsure of its own existence. The analyst watched the signal spike one last time, then flatten. "Interference just dropped," he said, disbelief creeping into his voice. "It's gone." No one cheered. Not yet. The aircraft sank toward the runway. 10 feet, 5. The wheels hit. Not gently, not perfectly, but they hit. Solid and real, tires screaming against asphalt as the plane slowed, drifting slightly before the captain brought it back to center. Every second felt fragile, as if the runway itself might disappear if they weren't careful. Finally, the aircraft rolled to a stop. For a moment, no one spoke. Not in the cockpit, not in the cabin, not in the control room. Then, the first officer laughed, short and shaky, the sound of someone who hadn't breathed properly in far too long. The captain closed his eyes and rested his forehead against the panel. Just for a second. In the cabin, applause started somewhere near the back, hesitant at first, then spreading, mixed with sobs and laughter, and hands pressed to faces. A woman hugged a stranger. A man whispered thank you to no one in particular. A child asked if they could unbuckle now. Ghost Rider pulled his jet up and away, circling once above the runway as emergency vehicles rushed toward the aircraft below. His fuel warning chimed softly, an afterthought now. "Nice work, Captain," he said over the radio. The reply came after a pause, thick with emotion. "Couldn't have done it without you." Ghost Rider smiled faintly inside his helmet. "You did the flying," he said. "I just watched." In the control room, people finally exhaled. Some leaned back in their chairs. Others stared at screens, hands trembling now that the crisis had passed. The supervisor rubbed his face, already thinking about reports, reviews, questions that would come later. But before anyone could fully relax, the analyst frowned at his console. "That signal," he said slowly. "It didn't just disappear." The room quieted again. "What do you mean?" the supervisor asked. "It didn't fade out," the analyst said. "It transferred, jumped frequency. For a second it locked onto another platform." Everyone turned toward the same display. An F-22. Ghost Riders. In the sky above. Ghost Rider felt it at the exact same moment. A brief shimmer in his systems, a whisper of resistance in the controls, gone almost instantly, but not before he noticed it. "Control," he said calmly, though his pulse had spiked. "I just experienced a transient anomaly." There was a pause. Then the controller answered carefully. "Copy, we saw it too." Ghost Rider looked down at the lights of the airport, the saved aircraft surrounded by vehicles and people who would remember this night forever. He thought about 2019, about being declared dead after something no one could fully explain, about how that ghost signal had followed him then, just as it had followed this plane now. "Was it targeting me?" he asked quietly. No one answered right away. In the control room, the supervisor looked at the analyst. The analyst shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he said, "but it recognized you." The words settled heavily. Ghost Rider turned his jet toward home, climbing into the dark sky once more. Below him, 183 lives were safe. Families would reunite. News headlines would celebrate the landing, the teamwork, the miracle. His name would not be mentioned. Officially, he was still dead. As he flew, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't an ending. The interference hadn't been destroyed or solved. It had withdrawn, learned, tested boundaries, and stepped back. And for the first time since 2019, Ghost Rider allowed himself to think the thought he'd avoided for years. Maybe he hadn't survived that mission by accident. Maybe whatever had haunted the skies that night wasn't finished with him yet. The sky slowly returned to what it had been before the alarms, the panic, and the questions that refused to stay buried. Ghost Rider climbed away from the airport lights, the glow shrinking behind him until it became just another quiet mark on the earth. His jet felt normal again, responsive, honest, but his mind was anything but calm. Control cleared him to head back, their voices professional, almost casual now that the emergency was over. No one mentioned the anomaly again. Not yet. Some conversations are postponed, not forgotten. Below, the passenger aircraft sat still on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles that bathed it in flashing light. Doors opened. Fresh air rushed in. People stepped out on unsteady legs, some laughing, some crying, some silent in shock. Phones came out. Messages were sent. "I'm safe. We landed. I love you." Simple words that meant everything. The captain stood at the cockpit door as passengers passed, accepting quiet thanks nods, hands squeezed a little too tightly. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. grateful, changed. He knew this flight would live with him forever, in quiet moments and restless nights. But he also knew something else. He hadn't been alone when it mattered most. The first officer lingered at the window for a moment, looking up at the empty sky where the F-22 had been. He wondered who that pilot really was. A name, a voice, a presence when they needed it. That was enough. In the control room, reports began almost immediately. Timelines were reconstructed. Data was replayed frame by frame. Engineers traced signal paths, comparing them to older incidents that had never fully made sense. The file marked 2019 was pulled again, no longer treated like a closed chapter. Patterns emerged, not conclusions, but enough to confirm one thing. What had happened was not random. The interference hadn't been malicious in the way movies imagine. No blinking countdowns, no dramatic takeover. It was subtle, curious, almost cautious, like something testing limits rather than breaking them, and it had backed off the moment real danger became unavoidable. That detail unsettled everyone who noticed it. Ghost Rider landed hours later, long after the news crews had packed up at the airport below. His jet rolled into a quiet hangar, lights dim, personnel limited. No applause, no ceremony, just routine motions performed by people who knew better than to ask questions out loud. He removed his helmet slowly, the familiar weight lifting from his neck. For a moment, he just sat there, listening to the ticking sounds of cooling metal. He thought about the 183 passengers, already on their way home or to hotels, telling stories that would change a little every time they were told. He hoped they would remember the fear fading, not the fear itself. A senior officer met him by the ladder. No rank was exchanged out loud. No names were used. "They're safe," the officer said. "I know," Ghost Rider replied. There was a pause, then the officer continued. "What you experienced up there, we're looking into it." Ghost Rider nodded. It followed the same pattern as before. The officer studied him carefully. "You're sure?" "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." Another pause. He'd lived in these pauses for years. "We're not going to bury this," the officer said quietly. "Not this time." Ghost Rider didn't respond right away. He'd heard promises before, but something in the tone felt different. Less fear, more resolve. "Good," he said finally. In the days that followed, the story reached the public in fragments. Headlines spoke of a dramatic landing, quick thinking, coordination between civilian and military aviation. The phrase F-22 escort caught attention. The passengers were interviewed. The captain was praised. Experts debated what might have caused the system's failure. No one mentioned interference. No one mentioned ghosts. Behind closed doors, however, questions multiplied. Why did the anomalies behave selectively? Why did they mirror events from years earlier? Why did they shift focus at the very end? And why did every trail, every unexplained data point, seem to circle back to one call sign? Ghost Rider returned to his routine, at least on the surface. Flights, simulations, long hours. He said little. He didn't need to. The skies felt different now, like something had been acknowledged that could not be ignored again. One evening, weeks later, he received a message routed through channels few people knew existed. No greeting, no explanation, just a set of coordinates and a time. He stared at the screen longer than he meant to. When he arrived at the location, it was unremarkable. An airfield most people drove past without noticing. Inside a modest building, a small group waited. Engineers, analysts, a familiar supervisor from the control room. They looked tired, but focused. On a large display, data from the incident scrolled slowly. "We think it's adaptive," one of them said. "Not intelligent in the human sense, but responsive. It reacts to complexity, to certain platforms, and to you," another added. Ghost Rider crossed his arms. "So what are you saying? That in 2019, you weren't the problem," the supervisor said. "You were the variable." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. They explained what they believed they were seeing. Not an enemy, not a weapon, but a phenomenon tied to the increasing density of advanced systems in shared airspace. A kind of feedback loop that emerged only under very specific conditions. Rare, unpredictable, dangerous, if misunderstood. And the passenger plane, Ghost Rider asked. It stumbled into the same conditions, the analyst said. Different systems, same trigger. You were the only one who'd seen it before. Ghost Rider exhaled slowly. For years, he had carried the unspoken blame of 2019, even knowing it didn't fit. Hearing this didn't erase the past, but it reshaped it. "What happens now?" he asked. The supervisor met his eyes. "Now we prepare. Quietly, and we stop pretending this was a one-time thing." Outside, the evening sky darkened, stars beginning to show. Ghost Rider thought about the night of the landing, the way the interference had withdrawn rather than fought, the way it seemed to recognize when lines were being crossed. "Next time," he said, "it might not back off." "That's why we need you," the supervisor replied. Ghost Rider didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the open sky, endless and indifferent. The same sky that had nearly taken everything from 183 people and then given it back. I was declared. Sometimes alone, sometimes alongside others who never knew his name. He watched the skies differently now, listening for patterns most people would miss. He wasn't hunting anything. He was waiting waiting to understand. The story of that night never fully made sense to the public, and maybe it never would. But its meaning was clear to those who lived it. Technology is powerful, but trust is stronger. Systems matter, but people matter more. And sometimes, the difference between disaster and survival comes down to a voice in the dark saying, "I'm here. You're not alone." Ghost Rider remained officially dead, but as long as there were skies to fly and lives moving quietly through them, that ghost would keep watching. Not as a myth, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that even in the most advanced age of aviation, the human element still decides how the story ends.